All his life, Cedric had aspired to be an executioner. While other boys in the village had been groomed for the stables, or had grown up fully expecting to follow their fathers into a life of farming, Cedric, the candlemaker's son, had had his sights set firmly on the trappings of the noose. As his fellows in the schoolyard shared triumphant tales of knights and their death-defying heroism on the Crusades, or stories they had heard of jousting on the king's estates, young Cedric's heroes had been closer to home, the fine, efficient stranglers who wowed the crowds on those dramatic Saturdays, sending murderers, thieves and vagabonds to their demise with split-second expertise. "Look at him swing," chuckled Cedric's father, usually such a mild-mannered man of gentle habits, the first time he had taken the boy to see an executioner in action. "Go on, love," cheered Cedric's mother, as the man hoisted the cord, cheering along with the many dozens of others in the crowd. The victim, a wiry little man in rags and strands of rat-black hair, who was apparently some sort of farm labourer turned thief, arrested for swiping sausages from the butcher's pantry, had lurched forwards with a scowling expression, eyes all but bulging from his bony face, to a wave of excited applause. The young Cedric had felt a tremor of exhilaration wriggle through his veins, a leap of joy in his infant heart. But unlike most present, his excitement was not so much aroused by the spectacle of the executed man, as by the prowess of the executioner himself. How nobly he had loosed the cord, with what finesse he had flicked his forearm, his lethal manoeuvre more akin to a segment of some exquisite dance than the performance of an executioner's routine. All the way home, and all that night as he lay awake in bed, the memory of the executioner's elegance had shimmered through his mind. "How do I get to be one, Dad?" he had asked the next morning as the old man tried to focus on his wicks and tallows. Eh?" His father squinted through tired eyes, up to his ears in candle wax at his messy desk. "You want to do what?" "Hanging," cried his son. "How do I get to do hanging?" "What the blazes do you want to be doing that for?" asked the father, busying himself in his tasks. "It's an horrible job, his hanging." But you were cheering him on yesterday, Dad. Everybody were. It were great." The candlemaker shuffled about, confused. Just forget about it, son. Get yourself a decent living, with good prospects. Now make yourself useful, and pass me that paraffin." That evening, in their cramped cottage, the child sat with his mother by the fire as she turned the cinders with an old brass fork, confiding his mortiferous ambitions to her also. "Oh," the frail old woman shuddered. The thought that any son of hers might end up an executioner sent shivers through her. "It's no job for a nice little lad like you, Cedric. You want to follow your father into candle-making, or see if you can get taken on at farm. If you work hard at your schooling, that can get taken on for gamekeeper, hunting and poisoning them pesky foxes. That's a nicer job than hanging, my laddie." For some weeks, Cedric moped about the village, divulging his hopes to selected neighbours. Those whom his parents had always told him were pillars of the community, figures for a young man to look up to and respect, gentlemen of probity and social standing, whose professions, he felt, might lend them an understanding of his own career aspirations. "I want to be an hangman, Bob," he told the butcher, taking a breather outside his shop, whose windows were hung with the carcasses of freshly mutilated pigs. "Oh, you don't want to be doing that," scowled the older man, chewing on a chunk of bleeding beef. "It's all blood and guts is hanging. It wouldn't do for me, lad." "But what about the one who hung the bloke who pinched your sausages?" asked Cedric, only for Bob's attention to be diverted by a familiar face passing by. "Hey, Ned," he hollered, "this little nipper reckons he wants to be hangman." "You what? It's a rotten job, is that, all killing and dead bodies. You want a nice peaceful job, like mine." The brawny-looking Ned with his scarred face and gap-toothed mouth, wore a blood-stained smock, and his thick, hairy hands looked caked in deep red residue. "Anyway, I'm off for a pint," he yawned. "It's just what a bloke needs after a long hard shift in the slaughterhouse." And the slaughterman lurched off down the lane towards the tavern. Time and again, the same faces Cedric had seen, bulging with glee at the spectacle of the recent hanging, expressed revulsion in the cold light of day at his quest to adopt the duties for himself. There was only one thing for it, he decided, after another aimless afternoon at the schoolhouse, growing more and more bored by the minute as the wittering farmer droned on with his descriptions of the duties the boys would be expected to undertake once they entered into farm employment. Every time the dull old man raised a pitchfork or brandished a hoe to demonstrate its handling, he imagined employing the same implement in the slicing off of a criminal's head, or impaling some retreating villain on the gatepost. Trying to erase the man's baleful voice from his ears, he made up his mind about where to go once released from the bonds of the day's education, and who to find there. "Aye, it's a grand sport, son, this hanging life." The misty-eyed executioner was all but swaying in inebriated contentment on his threadbare chair in the corner of his moth-eaten room, a smudgy glass of brandy at his side. "There's none more proud and powerful as me, up there on that scaffold. I'm king of the swingers, you might say, lad, you might say." And the old hangman lapsed into a smoky laugh. In this cramped and mildewed room, its windows strung with thick cobwebs, surrounded by mounds of unwashed clothes, half-empty jugs of ale, and tattered threads of rope, the remnants, Cedric assumed, of afternoons at the scaffold, the portly hangman seemed to the child like some softly spoken god. No matter the mess, no matter how his hunched frame lent an appearance of decrepitude, there was nowhere else Cedric would have chosen to be but here in the hangman's parlour. Many times he had passed the tumble-down cottage and assumed it must be derelict, until old Gerald the tramp had directed him today. Old Gerald knew everything, and where everybody lived, and Cedric had slipped him a couple of candles he had pinched from his father's drawer as a bribe for helping him. The elderly man was tittering. 45 year I've been hanging now, lad. I've 200 of the buggers to me name. 200 blokes what have swung across of me. Well, not across of me, of course. They broke the law, didn't they? So they only had themselves to blame. Stealing, fighting, and many that had bobbed folk off themselves. But it were my hands what sent 'em swinging, lad. Oh, I sent 'em swinging all right. Slowly he returned to a purposeful composure, serious and resolute. "Only mind what I say," he announced, with a finger raised. "The thing with this job, as with any other, is you get out of it what you put in. So think on that, lad. Think on that. You get out what you put in," ventured Cedric, with a mixture of initiative and robotic obedience. "That's right, son. So tell me, what made you want to take up the slaying life? Seeing you do it," cried Cedric, all but fizzing with enthusiasm. "I thought, that's what I want to do, that. Oh, so you're my biggest fan, are you?" And the old man wheezed with laughter, taking a glug of brandy and ruffling the young boy's hair. Oh yes, exclaimed Cedric, noticing that in the corner of the squalid room stood some sort of antique gibbet gathering dust. Its blunt blade sheened in cobwebs. The implement looked at least 100 years old, and Cedric imagined that legendary cutthroats of the past must have brandished its handles, run their death-hardy hands across its time-worn beams. "Ooh," cooed the child. "Can I have a go? Can I? Mr. Weir, can I have a go?" "Oh no, keep away from that, lad," cried Weir, creaking up from his cobwebby chair. "It's not for playing, in that. It'll have your head off." "Is it one you've used, Mr. Weir? Is it?" the youngster gasped, a foot away from the fearsome apparatus. "Aye, goes back a long way, does that thing." and a nostalgic Weir began to reminisce about the many gibbetings he had administered with the instrument over the years, and how some of the best-known hangmen of their age, Cutter Cripps, Swinging Sid, and the notorious One-Armed Archie, to name but a few, had honed their fatal skills at this vintage device. Soon Cedric was lost in reverie,